My name is Tyler Bublitz, and welcome to the first Sunday of Advent for the week of November 30th, 2025. I'm excited to have you here. I'm excited to dig in this week's podcast. And Happy New Year. Happy new church year. We are now in year A. We are now in the Gospel of Matthew throughout this year. And I'm excited to dig into it. It's always exciting to kind of move into that other gospel, something to change things up, just hearing a little bit of a different tonality, a little bit different perspective, hearing things a little bit from Matthew's perspective, I think should be a fun year for us to get into. And I am excited about it. And it's also this time where we move into Advent. And that movement, that change is a huge shift, I feel, just within the church year. It's typically the moment when people start realizing, oh yeah, Christmas is right there, even though, especially in the world in which we're in, we get it advertised more and more to us earlier and earlier and earlier. But yet, I feel when we start moving into Advent, that time after the American Thanksgiving and where I'm at, that's the moment when you start realizing, okay, we are starting to move into this time of preparation, this time of preparing ourselves for Christ and what that means. What does that look like? How does that take after the year in which we've been in? And how does that change as our perspective of time has continued to shift throughout time and space? So I think a lot of those questions, a lot of those ideas, a lot of those things, it's vital for us to be thinking about and contemplating, especially as we are moving into this year and starting to think about it. And I think it plays a little bit into the question that I closed out the last church year with, which was, where are you searching for God and how are you searching for God? And I had a great response this week stating, I don't necessarily search for God. God finds me. And it's the aspect of us recognizing where God is. And it's in those little moments, those little things where we're finding God out in nature and recognizing how nature continues to thrive even in spots where we don't necessarily expect nature to be doing well. We find those moments where something we assumed is dead is suddenly resurrected and it continues to have life. And I think those are great reminders. And it's just a great reminder in and of itself that a lot of times that we need to continue to be open for us to see where God is. And us acknowledging and looking at where is God in all of this, that we're more opening our eyes to where God is, not necessarily, I'm going to go and find God. It's, no, I'm already here. When are you going to recognize that I'm already here? And I think that's a great way to kind of shift our mindset. And as we are moving into this time of preparation, which is the season of Advent, I think that's a great place to be in. So let's just jump into it. The Old Testament text then for this Sunday is from Isaiah chapter 2, verses 1 to 5. This is a moment where we're talking about the city of Jerusalem, which is the high point. This is the place that everybody goes to for worship. And they're talking about the mountains that are right around Jerusalem. They're very important. They've been talked about throughout time and space, and they were often used within worship here. And especially as Jerusalem is kind of looked at as the center point, is asked and kind of told to us in the Old Testament, you should be trying to go toward Jerusalem. And this is when we also get later on, as Jesus kind of talks about this city on a hill that's casting its light for others to see. This is kind of that image as well, because of where Jerusalem is located, that it is this point that is elevated above the other places. But it's also this moment here where when we're going to Jerusalem, when we're getting there, that this is a place that fills us with something that's different than what the rest of the world has been telling us. There's a peace that comes from the teachings, from being in this place, from acknowledging God's presence that we start seeing in verse 3 and 4 here, of how it takes what we have seen in typical ways, swords and plowshares, and it makes them into something new. It allows us to be able to look and learn and be at peace together in a new and different way. And this then leads into Psalm 122, all 9 verses of it. And this is, again, this recognition then of all of us being together, all people coming together, and recognizing that there is this peace that comes when we are all together in the Lord's presence, and that as we are brought together, we also recognize the love and care that God has not only for us, but everyone around us. So thus, this changes our perspective on how we look at things and recognizing that this praising of God should be uniting us together. The epistle text or New Testament text then this week is out of Romans chapter 13, verses 11 to 14. This then is another moment where we're talking about as believers, and especially as Paul is writing here, Paul is assuming that the second coming of Christ is coming soon. And so thus, we should be walking and living our lives in a way that represents God well and be ready for whenever that time comes, that we are prepared, and that this is not a time for us to, I'm saved, so thus it gives me clearance from anything. It's more looking at it from the perspective of God is coming, I am saved, and thus I'm going to continue to walk in this light so that whether it's tomorrow or 500 years from now or further, it doesn't matter. I am prepared for that. And that leads a little bit into the gospel text then this week is out of Matthew chapter 24, verses 36 to 44. And we get here at the beginning, and I think this is really important for us to remember, that neither the angels nor heaven nor the Son, but only the Father knows the day and the hour on when Christ is coming. And then Jesus kind of continues this, going into this analogy, talking about how Noah, with building the ark, that they didn't necessarily know when this was. The building and everything happened, and then all of a sudden, bam, it was filled, and boom, everything changed. And so this recognition on how it all happens quickly, it all happens suddenly. And then we get into kind of this talk we get typically with the apocalyptic type of text that we have two people together, one is taken, one is left. But it's this idea of how we need to still be prepared because we do not know the hour on when this is. And so thus, in being prepared, we have to mentally, physically, spiritually be continuing to work that so that when that time comes, we are not surprised. And this is where we then get verse 43, understanding that if the owner of the house knew when the thief was coming, they would have stayed awake to make sure that their house was not broken into. Thus, the Son of Man is coming an hour you do not expect. This recognition for us is we shouldn't be dwelling on that aspect of it. It's the aspect of continuing to be just genuinely prepared for whenever that time is coming. But before we jump into how faith and science come together this week, we have to do our shameless plug. Working Preacher. If you have interest in Working Preacher, I'd highly recommend it. Between the Sermon Brainwaves podcasts or commentaries or discussions, since I'm the ordained minister, I use them on a weekly basis to help give me some ideas, direction, ways to be thinking about these texts. It's a great resource to dig into, whether you are in front of the congregation or sitting in the pews. There's a lot of things that we can do to help prepare us for worship, to make sure that we are getting the most out of that experience, being able to get the most out of what these texts have to give. And a lot of times that might mean looking at what has other biblical scholars said about these texts. What are other readings and things that we can think about and things to be contemplating as we are going through these texts? It's really important. So I'd highly recommend checking out workingpreacher.org for that. But I'd also highly recommend, to help you along that same road, is checking out the Revised Common Lectionary coming from Vanderbilt's Divinity Library. I really enjoy how they lay out the text week to week here, but also having art, prayers, hymns, other daily readings that help prepare you for the week that's upcoming, other versions of the text to be able to look at and compare. This is something that, as we are taking our faith seriously, as we are going in and talking about these texts and thinking about these texts, a lot of times it means that we need to be able to spend a little bit more time with them. And this is another great resource to help you along that journey. So I'd highly recommend checking out the Revised Common Lectionary coming from Vanderbilt's Divinity Library as another great resource to help prepare you for that journey. Finally, another great resource to be checking out to help you with that is looking at the Green Blades Preaching Roundtable or the Green Blades Rising publication. This is either a weekly reflection going through ecological echoes, implications, and urgencies, or a monthly newsletter that kind of goes through some of those resources along with some additional events or other different ecological ways of thinking about these texts. There's some great homilies that get written for these texts and kind of lays it all out. I know I've written for them in the past. It's a great resource. I'd highly recommend checking that out, and that'll be the first link down in the references section linked in the show notes. I took a look back, and I don't always do this, but especially when we're getting into Matthew here, and especially when we're looking at these texts, I wanted to see what have I exactly talked about in years past with going through these texts. And when I looked at them, I've kind of danced around the same point, and I want to take, again, probably a similar avenue that we'll be taking here this week, but also looking at it from some different examples and thinking about it. But what is the main premise and themes that we are picking up here this week? And for me, it's this aspect of peace and patience. And I would argue that what we're also seeing within this is that they go hand in hand. And I would argue within the world that at least I'm experiencing, and I would assume you are, as I've talked to many different people around, but the world seems to be moving faster and faster. And I think sometimes the essence of patience and not having places for us to have patience is hurting our peace. And I know within my life, the times that I have felt the most at peace is when I allow myself to be patient. This is not something that is just a biblical thing. This is something that specifically within science that we have to do. It is part of the scientific method. It is part of being a scientist, is that there are times and places that you just have to be patient. And that's hard. We make our hypothesis, we set up the tests that we're going to run, set up the experiment, and there is an aspect in certain experiments that you just have to sit there and wait. And you still have to be observant, and you still have to be keenly aware to whatever is going on, because you do not know the moment of time when the thing that you're looking for is going to happen. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of this, and I think it's something, again, as we are entering into this Advent season and we know what comes after that, this is part of what I would argue is a main theme and a main understanding of what we need to be doing as part of this Advent season is patience. So one of them that I think about really quickly, and especially if you've had any chemistry background, is thinking about titrations. Now, titrations are typically when you're mixing two different compounds together, two different chemicals together, and typically what is happening is that you're trying to get to specific concentrations, that there's a specific ratio that you're trying to get to, and when that happens, that there is some type of chemical reaction. And typically one of the big ones, especially with titrations, is that when that happens, that naturally there is a color change within that. So it can be like acid and bases, and then it gets to a specific concentration and boom, it changes another color. And I distinctly remember I was not an amazing chemistry student in college, but going through and doing this titration and knowing that initially it was going to take a decent amount of time. So the temptation was to just open it up and let it just titrate through, let that chemical go into the base that we have there at the bottom, the acid into the base, and boom. But if you did that, if you fell into that temptation, the issue could be is that you blow past the moment where that specific spot is, and thus you have no idea what the ratio is. And granted, we could do, and especially within chemistry, you were doing a lot of the math work behind it, and you could have rough estimations. But there was also the aspect of at times being able to go through and do it and then work backwards and say, okay, this is what I got. This is what was the calculations, and making sure it checked out the other way. And so I distinctly remember putting that in there, turning that knob, and just getting it so it's just drip, 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 waiting and waiting and waiting from these two clear liquids to suddenly get this pinkish hue to come in, and then a deep pink afterwards. It took a lot of patience, it took a lot of time, and it took a lot of anticipation, paying attention, and realizing that moment that happened to stop it so that you could measure it and probably do it again to make sure that you were getting your right numbers. Another one that I think of distinctly within, again, the typical scientific process, and this one goes back for me to when I was in high school. I remember distinctly going out with my high school biology teacher, and we were chasing the northern hawk owl. Now, northern hawk owls, they're a very unique owl species. They're 100% genetically owl, and we've talked about them before. But they hunt not only nocturnally, but they'll hunt during the day as well. And so it's really cool because you're more likely to see them during the day compared to a lot of other owl species. It's not impossible to see owls during the day, but it's typically a little bit harder, and they're typically not hunting. They're more just kind of hanging out, which that isn't the case for northern hawk owls. They are more than willing to hunt during the day. And this distinct day, we were out there looking for him. We found him, and it was super cool. We're sitting there and observing it, and we're out there probably for 45 minutes. And you get to the point where it's okay, the owl's there, we're watching it, but we're able to have a conversation. And one of the things that we kept noticing while we were standing there is throughout the conversation, the owl was, looking around, but it kept hearing things, and it would turn its head and stare at a spot and listen. And then it would go off to the next thing, listening and looking around. And then again, it would turn and listen. And this is happening over 15, 20, 30 minutes plus. That this owl, every so often, you could just tell it's locking in on something. It's hearing something, but it hadn't reacted. And then after about 45 minutes, suddenly, the owl turns, it's hearing the thing again. And this time it decides to react. And this time, then it drops out of the tree and goes straight into the bush, and boom, it grabs a vole and comes up and goes into another place. And in this case, this northern hawk owl was eating quite well and went and stashed it somewhere else. That it had been hearing that vole for 45 minutes and then decided this was the time, this was the space to now react. I just don't see that, or even within my own faith, do that nearly enough. I don't take that moment in time to just listen and not react, to observe, know what's going on, but still wait. Still have the patience to know, no, there'll be a better opportunity. They're still too far underneath the snow. I'm going to wait a little bit longer. No, they're still too far underneath that snow. I'm going to wait a little bit longer. No, it's not as clear of an opening as I would like. I'm going to wait a little bit longer. Now is the time, let's go. I think within a world where we're used to free shipping, where we're used to fast shipping, where we're used to going and just doing things so quickly, there is an aspect of the patience of waiting and doing that whole process that we miss. And it's one of the things that I know for me that I really enjoy, and it helps me see God so much better, is going and walking in the woods, or going and taking a walk, clearing your head and just being. See what you find. Sit, listen, observe, put pieces together slowly as you sit there, listen and observe, and do that again and again and again. And you start to understand the community that's around you and what's going on around you. They start to learn who you are if you continue to go back to that spot and understand that you're not a threat as you're sitting there and listening and observing. And it's almost in those moments that then suddenly you have more things revealed to you. Patience is such a key thing within science that yes, we can theorize things all we want, but we have this desire to understand, to know. And at some point, then you have to do that. And so that means to have the patience to just do it. It's one of the things, like even now, where we talk about some of the different theories of Einstein that even in the last 20 years that we've been proving. It was theories that Einstein had were, one, the brilliance of who Albert Einstein was to be able to theorize and see out and be able to do things beyond what we were able to test. But then also getting to the place for us that, okay, now we can test this. And recognizing the process and the steps, and then still doing it, and still at times taking time to do it. We talked about that a little bit last week too, with talking about how I attached it down in the show notes, talking about the moth and connecting it with the specific flower that had been theorized by Darwin. And thus they're going in and they find it and see it on camera for one of the first times, and the enthusiasm with that. But also the patience that it took as they sat out all night long waiting for something that may or may not exist. Patience. The patience to slow down and allow yourself to slow down. It's one of the things too that I've been thinking about a lot for myself is the aspect of slowing down and when is the right time to slow down and allowing yourself to slow down. I know for me, one of the things was talked a little bit about my half marathon, but one of the big things is I tweaked an ankle and I'm still feeling the effects of that and trying to balance when do I just let it rest and when do I need to exercise it some so it can get some blood moving through it to then let it rest some more to help it actually heal. And having that balance and figuring out that balance. The balance of being prepared for Christ's coming again, but not dwelling on it is a difficult balance. It's a balance that we have to recognize that we are not in control. Jesus is not even in control. The angels aren't in control. The Father is in control. And the Father knows the time and the place and when that's going to happen, but no one else does. And that's not the point. The point is being prepared, doing the preparation work to be prepared, to run the experiment, to know what you're looking for, and then the act of doing it and not knowing when it's going to happen. That is the difficult part. But yet, that's the most rewarding part when it happens. It's one of the things that I love about doing field work. Another example, I distinctly remember when I was in college and I got an assignment from somebody to go out and there's a rumored wolf pack in this area. We just got fresh snow. Go out, drive, see if you can find prints. And I did. And I had a general area and to go and look. And I remember driving around and then finding the prints and getting a ruler out to measure and showing the different things to verify that this was a wolf print and not a dog print. Taking pictures to be able to document. But that was go out there and you may or may not find what we're looking for. But the potential is there. And the potential is higher because it's fresh snow. Go and find it. The anticipation with that, but also being patient and being calm and being prepared, but yet also still waiting. It's one of the things that I've kind of beat myself up also with some of my photography stuff the last few years. There's been a couple times that I've gone out to do things and I've taken too much time. I've been too comfortable, taken too long to get out of the vehicle, not having my gear prepared, that I wasn't fully prepared for the moment. Or I gave up too soon, and finding that balance. Jim Brandenburg, I know, passed away this last year, a great photographer, shot for National Geographic and is from originally Minnesota. But one of the things that he would talk about is there were times before he went to bed, he would practice different moves and different procedures so that when that moment came, especially as he focused on a lot of wildlife photography, that my body just knew what to do and I just react. I didn't think. And we hear that like with athletes and different things of that nature, but our faith should be similar. And that's, I think, a little bit also on what Jesus is getting at here, that we have to be prepared because we don't know when that moment is happening, while also not dwelling on it. Practice because you don't know when you're going to use it in a game. Within our faith, we need to be ready for the peace that God provides. And in order, I would argue, for us to be ready for that, we have to practice patience to allow in moments of that peace. We have to practice patience to allow moments of that peace to enter in, because that's what we're practicing. So that our body just knows what to do when that peace comes. That it is so familiar that we understand what this isn't a new experience to us. The length of time will be the new experience, not the peace in and of itself. And the only way to get to that place is for us to have the patience to find those places, to experience that peace, and to keep practicing it of getting to that place. Observation in science is not always instantaneous. Sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes we'll talk to Brian Collins, my high school biology teacher, about this, but I remember him talking about when he was doing some different field work many, many years ago and doing observations of different bird nests in Central America. And you would sit there for hours with a scope pointed at a nest, and you're having to write down observations of everything that's going on. Birds coming to and from the nest for feeding, building materials, what they're feeding, but you're always on guard. You're always, because you don't know what the next moment may bring, that provides information that we didn't know before, be able to correlate things in a new way that we've never been able to before. And so it's constant work, it's difficult work, but it's also peaceful work at the same time. Not allowing yourself to be mulled over with the mundane, to be able to see through what's going on. And is that not a better example of what our faith should look like in general? Should it not be like what a northern hawk owl does for 45 minutes, listening to voles underneath the snow where they can't see it and understanding when is the time to go, that the opportunity is finally there, that they're never going to quite literally see it coming. Within our own faith, we need to practice these things so that we understand that peace so well, so intimately, and understanding that the patience that it's required additionally to get to that peace is also a major aspect of this. It's one of the hard things within science, is not always linear growth. I learned something and it might take an extended period of time for us to make that next big breakthrough. And that's hard. It's frustrating, but necessary. And I would argue when we are doing it well, we also recognize a lot of times our faith is the same way. We want our faith to just be linear, but anybody who has been in the faith long enough will tell you it's not always linear. There are peaks, there are valleys, there are vistas, and there are times where you are just barely climbing and it feels like the rocks are moving underneath you. But yet, it's still all very important, because when we get to those vistas, when we get to those mountaintops, when we even sometimes are in those valleys, and the time it just feels so difficult, there's peace to be found there if we allow ourselves to slow down enough to admire it. And I know for me, it's something that I continue to chase and to look for and find slowly but surely, but it's amazing how often I even forget it myself. So the question I have for you this week is, where do you find your peace? Where do you find your peace? I know for me, one of the big ones is going out and finding that quiet place in the woods and just listening. There's been plenty of times that all the worries of the world, all the things that are going on just fade away so quickly. But it means that I have to allow myself to slow down and to stop and to breathe. And it's only then that I start getting that peace that passes all understanding. And I get glimpses of it. As we are in the season of preparation, I would argue that this is one of the first core steps that we need to take in order to truly prepare for what is coming. So, we'll wrap this up as we always do. I pray God blesses you through your faith and amazes you through science.